The situation was critical. What was expected to be a straightforward amphibious landing operation on Bougainville Island in late 1943 had turned into a lethal trap for the Marines conducting the invasion. A heavily fortified and camouflaged enemy artillery gun was raining fire over the landing crafts, desperately trying to reach the beachheads. Japanese artillery crew had already destroyed 4 landing boats and severely damaged 10 others, inflicting numerous casualties on the Allied forces. To make matters worse, the artillery post was strategically positioned so that no ship could approach the islands without coming well within the range of the powerful Type 94 75mm mountain gun. The operation was at risk of collapsing at any moment, but it was then, at the darkest hour, that U.S. Marine Sergeant Robert Allen Owens did the unthinkable. Owens assembled 4 volunteers and proceeded to charge toward the artillery post in a daring assault. Shots rang across Cape Torokina, and the Marines on the beach held their breath as the world seemed to stop. The fate of Operation Cherry Blossom now hung on the actions of Owens and his brave men. Setting the stage. By 1942, the Japanese forces had overwhelmed and swiftly captured the Solomon Islands in the Pacific theater of World War II, taking the territory away from the Australian administration. Imperial Japan wanted to control the Solomon Islands and part of New Guinea to cut off sea lane communications between Australia and the US. However, the Pacific Front had taken a drastic turn by the end of 1943, as the Allies were now on the offensive, pushing the Japanese back as the Imperial forces were forced into an ever-waning defensive position. The American forces were coming from a highly successful invasion of the island of Guadalcanal and the Central Territories in the Solomon Islands, and they were determined to take Bougainville Island as a staging ground for their eventual incursion further into Japanese territory. Bougainville had been chosen as a way to circumvent the highly fortified island of Rabaul, from where the Japanese were deploying significant air forces to the surrounding islands. However, attacking and securing Rabaul was deemed extremely costly by the US officials, so they opted for an indirect approach, where they would capture the less defended Bougainville instead of using it as a base, thus cutting off supplies to Rabaul while effectively strangling the Japanese base. The Allies deployed numerous coast watchers into the island in risky operations where the covert agents were inserted via high-speed motorboats to gather intelligence and befriend the local population. Many of these agents were executed or captured by the Japanese. However, they managed to pinpoint specific landing beaches for the invasion. The Allies needed to land on the island, disable the enemy airfields, and set up their own airbase, but the northern and eastern parts of the landmass were heavily reinforced, and landing there was out of the question. The best location to land was deemed to be in Empress Augusta Bay, around Cape Torokina on the western coast of Bougainville. However, the area around Cape Torokina was covered in swamps and rough terrain, making the construction of an airfield extremely difficult, while the bay was open to the sea and considered highly difficult to anchor Allied ships. Still, the fact that it was mostly isolated from the leading Japanese groups around Buka and Boine, north and south of the island, could not be overlooked, and the beach would allow Allied troops to stage air attacks against the enemy airfields while remaining relatively safe from a ground counteroffensive. Misdirection. U.S. intelligence predicted that it would take the Japanese 3 months to launch a counterattack on Torokina, and even if they went forward with it, the area provided a remarkable defensive advantage because it was surrounded by 2 rivers and a mountainous area. Preparations for the invasion, codenamed Operation Cherry Blossom, were broad and significant in scale. Allied air forces conducted over 3,200 sorties against Japanese airfields surrounding the landing site and the wider Bougainville area to reduce the ability of the Japanese to interfere with the landings. Before the landings at Cape Torokina, an assault was launched on the Treasury Islands by New Zealand and US forces to secure anchorages around Blanche Harbor and establish a radar station to support air operations over Bougainville. Meanwhile, a fire mission was executed on the shortlands to the south to divert Japanese attention away from the area. Simultaneously, a battalion of paramarines conducted a raid on Choiseul, a major Japanese stronghold and the place Imperial forces expected to be attacked next by the Allies. The diversion was highly successful, with the Japanese sending thousands of reinforcements to Choiseul to defend their position while leaving Bougainville unattended and vulnerable to what was about to come. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. Japanese forces had not only been severely weakened by preemptive strikes, but also tricked by diversion tactics into reinforcing irrelevant locations while leaving little protection at Cape Torokina. The assault was planned from different sites to throw Japanese intelligence off and prevent attracting too much attention. Transport Division A departed from Espiritu Santo, B from Guadalcanal, and C departed from Efate. The troops boarded the transport ships at each location on October 28th, 29th, and 30th. The vessels proceeded to take long and complex routes to hide their true destination from possible Japanese informants. By October 31st, the three divisions rendezvoused at sea in a predetermined location before beginning their final approach to Bougainville from southwest of the Solomons. Then, on the day of the landings, Naval Task Force 39, composed of several cruisers and destroyers under Rear Admiral Aaron S. Merrill, bombarded the airfields around Buka and the Bonus Peninsula in a coordinated attack that disabled much of the aerial combat capabilities of the Japanese forces in the area. An additional misdirection effort was conducted at the last minute when the convoy suddenly changed directions to feign an invasion of the Shortland Islands and confuse Japanese air forces patrolling the area. At dusk, the ships moved towards their actual destination. Landings. Pre-war charts of Bougainville proved to be highly unreliable, and efforts to improve them by air reconnaissance couldn't provide details of underwater obstructions, resulting in several collisions against uncharted shoals during the convoy's approach to Cape Torokina, with one of the ships running aground. The initial landing took place at 12 pre-designated beaches along an 8,000-yard front northwest of and including Cape Torokina and Puruwata Island. As the Marines came ashore, a force of 31 U.S. Marine aircraft deployed out of Munda attacked Japanese positions on the landing beaches. Similarly, 40 U.S. Air Force and Royal New Zealand Air Force fighters provided cover to the Marines as they disembarked. The 9th Marines then struck the northwestern beaches, while the 3rd Marines Raider Battalion, under Lieutenant Colonel Fred D. Beans, seized Puruwata Island against brutal resistance from the Japanese forces. The operation had been designed to ensure a smooth and quick landing and an immediate retreat of all craft, as a swift Japanese air counterattack was expected. However, rough seas and deficient landing conditions complicated the situation, causing the loss of many landing ships as they attempted to retreat. One man's sacrifice. One of the beachheads in Cape Torokina offered hefty resistance to the invasion during the initial landings of November 1st, and Marines trying to land were held up as a fortified artillery gun fired at one landing craft after another. The Type 94 75mm mountain gun was carefully camouflaged into its surroundings and shielded with a towering fortification made of wooden logs. Sitting on the side of a cliff, the gun was impossible to flank, and the Americans had not landed enough forces to conduct a frontal attack. The Japanese artillery crew then inflicted numerous casualties on the American invaders, sinking 4 landing boats and severely damaging 10 more. The U.S. troops fell into disarray as the casualties mounted, and the inability to land dawned on them. Making the situation even direr, no boats could approach the beach without passing within 150 yards or less from the gun's muzzle, and the artillery piece was so well positioned that rifle fire and grenades could not reach it. The U.S. officers were considering interrupting the strike when Sergeant Robert Allen Owens decided to take control of the situation. He knew that the only way to neutralize the gun was to charge it directly from the front. Owens recruited 4 volunteers to assist him in the dangerous mission. He then positioned the 4 Marines in a way that could suppress enemy fire from nearby bunkers, and when the moment was right, the 6'3", 232-pound soldier charged right into the mouth of the firing gun, courageously penetrating the perimeter from the only possible place, the fire port. He then started firing left and right, causing the Japanese to panic, as they thought they were being overwhelmed. Meanwhile, Owens chased the artillery crew off their post, forcing them out into his men's fire. Unfortunately, as the Japanese abandoned the artillery cannon, Sergeant Owens was struck by enemy fire. Still, his actions changed the course of the battle, as the gun's chamber was loaded, and the beach was almost closed when he dashed through the fire port. Over 150 rounds of high-explosive shells were ready for firing, and the destruction would have been monumental. For the Japanese, losing the gun was a significant hindrance. They would make numerous efforts to recapture the piece, but Owens' comrades would not allow his sacrifice to go in vain. When asked about Owens' actions, Major General Alan H. Turnage, commanding general of the 3rd Marine Division, said, quote, Among many brave acts on the beachhead of Bougainville, no other single act saved the lives of more of his comrades or served to contribute so much to the success of the landings. Owens was awarded the Medal of Honor for his bravery and sacrifice. Triumph. As the Allies had predicted, the Japanese quickly launched an airborne counteroffensive. 44 fighters and 9 dive bombers took off from Rabaul, tasked with preventing the Marines from taking control of the Cape Torokina beaches. However, the Allied forces were expecting the move, and the enemy aircraft were intercepted by New Zealand and U.S. Marine fighter aircraft before reaching Bougainville. Japanese warplanes were also met with unrelenting fire from the escorting U.S. destroyers, resulting in the annihilation of 26 Japanese aircraft. Meanwhile, unloading operations were halted as Allied fighters repelled the Japanese offensive. Still, when it was accomplished, the Marines on the ground continued to prepare the new base of operations in the newly captured territory. By the early afternoon, a second Japanese onslaught of over 100 aircraft was launched from New Britain. An Allied force of 34 Air Sols fighters under the direction of USS Conway was deployed to face the new threat. Despite being outnumbered, the Allied aircraft offered remarkable resistance. Only 12 Japanese warplanes managed to penetrate the Air Sols fighter formation and reach the beaches, but they didn't deal significant damage to the Marines on the ground, and soon they were forced to retreat. No further counteroffensives took place that day, and despite the numerous obstacles, the landings were declared a massive success. The initial force of just over 7,500 Marines then took control of the beachheads through November 2nd and 3rd without encountering any additional resistance of significance. These troops ventured inland through small dry land corridors and began clearing defenders from the dense jungle. In addition, the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion deployed dogs to find Japanese troops hiding in the undergrowth, and by 11 a.m., they neutralized all remaining organized enemy forces. Some hours later, the entire landing zone was secured. As was planned, Japanese forces on the island were unable to reach the landing area in the following days, allowing the Allies to set up fortifications and begin the construction of an airbase. The entire island would fall to Allied control in the next few months, pushing their advantage one step closer to the Japanese main island and making Operation Cherry Blossom a success. Thank you for watching. What do you think of Sergeant Owens' actions? Please share your opinion in the comment section below. And for more exciting history-inspired content, make sure to subscribe to all the Dark Documentaries channels, where we never stop publishing videos. Stay tuned.